blood is contained within the heart and the blood vessels in the body. The heart is responsible for pumping blood through the blood vessels. So you can think of the heart and blood vessels as a closed container or a closed circuit. So from the heart, the blood travels first through arteries, and the main artery that leaves the heart is called the aorta. The aorta then branches into smaller arteries, but these are still fairly large, and the major arteries are going to different parts of the body. So you may have an artery going towards the kidney, an artery going towards the liver, an artery going towards the arms, the legs, etc. Arteries then further branch in order to form arterioles, and arterioles are just small arteries that lead into capillary beds. And all major tissues, or I should say most major tissues and organs, have a capillary bed in them. And the capillary bed is where nutrient and gas exchange happens. So recall that one of the functions of the blood is to transport materials throughout the body. So this includes things like hormones, oxygen, and nutrients like glucose. So the capillary beds are where things like glucose and oxygen can diffuse from the blood into the extracellular fluid, into the body cells in order for them to have them to make energy in the form of ATP. And then waste products like carbon dioxide can then diffuse from the tissues into the capillaries where they can be returned back to the heart. So the blood in the capillaries, after exchange has occurred, first converge in order to form venules, and then venules converge to form veins. And just like arteries, there are major veins coming from all the major or most of the major tissues and organs in the body. And then all veins converge into either the superior vena cava or there's an inferior vena cava that you can't see here. But the vena cavae, the two of them, delivers blood back to the heart. And so you can see that the heart pumps blood out through the aorta and then through arteries, arterioles, and then capillaries, and then to venules, veins, and then the vena cavae, which return the blood back to the heart. As I mentioned, arteries, arterioles, venules, and veins are really just tubes or conduits that carry blood from one area to another, but capillary beds are where nutrient and gas exchange can happen. So if we look at this diagram here, we can see once again that our main artery leaving the heart is the aorta, and then the aorta branches into smaller arteries, and some of those smaller arteries go to different parts of the body. So these smaller arteries can go to, say, the lungs. Actually, the lungs are up here. That's actually a different one, so that was a bad example. But the arteries, so for example, the hepatic artery goes to the liver, and the renal artery goes to the kidneys. And you have other arteries that will deliver blood to the reproductive organs or the urinary organs or all the other different organs in your body. And then gas exchange and nutrient exchange happens at the capillary beds. And then the capillary beds deliver blood into venules and then veins. So you can see the hepatic artery. Then after the capillary bed in the liver does what it needs to do, that blood drains through the hepatic vein, which converges with other veins, and eventually all those veins deliver their products into the vena cava, which delivers it delivers it back to the blood. Now, if we look at a cross-section of a blood vessel, we can take a look at some of the structures associated with the blood vessel itself. So first of all, blood vessels are hollow structures because the blood has to go somewhere. So the lumen is this inside space, and this lumen is where the blood would be found. Then if we look at arteries versus veins, a couple things to keep in mind is that arteries tend to have thicker walls and a smaller lumen. Whereas veins, the walls are thinner and the lumen tends to be larger, and in some of them there are valves, which we'll talk about the function of those a little bit later. But this is because arteries tend to they're coming from the heart. They're receiving blood from the heart. So there's a higher pressure of blood going through an artery. So this thick wall helps that artery to kind of deal with that pressure so that it doesn't pop. Whereas veins are larger, and they don't have as much pressure. The pressure in the blood is kind of dissipated by the time it gets to the veins. So the blood vessel walls don't need to be as thick. But in general, blood vessels have 3 layers called tunics. So the tunica interna is the innermost layer. And you can see it here on the artery pretty clearly. It's also on the vein, it's just not as clear. And so the tunica interna is made up of endothelial tissue, which is a type of epithelial tissue. So it's the innermost layer, and this is the layer of the blood vessel that's actually in contact with the blood. The tunica media is the middle layer, and it is primarily made up of smooth muscle. And this smooth muscle can either constrict in order to make the lumen smaller, or it can relax in order to make the lumen bigger. So vasodilation dilation means to get bigger. So vasodilation is where the smooth muscle relaxes to make the lumen bigger. And vasoconstriction is where the lumen gets smaller because that smooth muscle contracts and it makes the lumen smaller. Now, this can help to direct blood to different parts of the body. So there are times when you need more blood going to your skeletal muscles than you do to, say, your digestive tract structures. So, for example, we talked about the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. And the sympathetic division is the fight or flight, so you need more blood going to your heart and lungs and skeletal muscles, whereas the parasympathetic is the rest and digest system, where you don't need as much blood going to your skeletal muscles. Instead, you need more blood going to your digestive muscles. So, for example, when the parasympathetic division is activated, there's going to be vasodilation of the blood vessels going to the digestive organs. That way the digestive organs can have more nutrients and materials needed to do digestion. It also allows for an increase in the absorption of nutrients from the food. But at the same time, the blood vessels going to, say, the skeletal muscles are going to vasoconstrict or get smaller. And that's because if all of your blood vessels were relaxed and completely open, you wouldn't have enough blood to fill your body. So instead, blood can be kind of directed from one area of the body to a different area depending on where it's needed. Then the tunica externa is the outermost layer, and this is primarily made up of connective tissue, and it helps to anchor the blood vessel in place. So this blood vessel is stuck in this area here because that smooth muscle connects it to the surrounding tissue.